Hi, and welcome back to English Lessons with Stephanie. This is grammar lesson 14, much less, modifying different parts of speech and comparatives. How would you make these sentences stronger? Here are 4 sentences. These sentences are okay, but you can make them stronger. The rainforest is important. I like this movie. Fred is taller than Hector, and Hector talks more than Fred. Let's strengthen these sentences. So you could say, the rainforest is very important, or I really like this movie, or Fred is much taller than Hector, or Hector talks a lot more than Fred. These phrases are called modifiers. We use them to show stress or emphasis. When we're modifying sentences, we have to pay attention to the parts of speech because we use different phrases to modify adjectives, verbs, and adverbs. Let's start by looking at the blue column describing adjectives. If we want to show a lot of stress, we could say he is very tall. So very is modifying tall. Or we are really hungry. Really is modifying hungry. Or it's quite strange. Quite is modifying strange. This makes these words stronger. But in the next column in green, if we want to show a lot of stress for a verb, such as exercise, we can't say I very exercise or I really exercise. We would say I exercise a lot. Or in the pink column, adverbs, we can use the same words that we use for adjectives. He walked very quickly, they moved really slowly, or they talked quite strangely. Next, let's talk about medium stress. So go back to our adjective column, and we can see how we can say something is just a medium amount more. So not really a lot, but just medium. He is pretty tall, or we are sort of or kind of hungry. In the verbs, we would say I exercised a fair amount, or I sort of, or I kind of exercised. And again, the adverbs are the same as the adjectives. He walked pretty quickly, or they moved sort of or kind of quickly. In our last row, a little stress. So this is the smallest amount of emphasis we can show. Instead of saying we are hungry, we are a bit hungry, or it's a little bit strange. So we could say it's a little strange or a little bit strange. For verbs, we would use the same phrases. I exercised a bit or I exercised a little. And notice in the verbs column that the modifiers go after the verb instead of before the verb like with adjectives and adverbs. And then with the adverb column, we would use the same. We walked a bit slowly or a little slowly. And again, these would go in front of the adverbs. Or another way to modify these words is to use adverbs. Remember that adverbs are words that often end in ly, and these are used to modify not only verbs, but adjectives and adverbs. So we could say, he is amazingly tall, or he is incredibly tall or surprisingly tall, or I barely exercised, or I hardly exercised if we want to use verbs. Or with adverbs, he walked uncommonly slowly. So adverbs are another type of modifier. And the words very, really, and quite, these are all adverbs also. So let's practice. Pause the video and complete the following sentences to show a lot of stress. When you're finished, unpause the video to see the answers. Okay, so you can say for number 1, I'm going to bed. I'm really sleepy, or very sleepy, or quite sleepy. Number 2, the same thing. Your hair has gotten really long, very long, or so long. Number 3, they talk a lot. Because this is a verb, you want to put the phrase after the verb. And with number 4, an adverb, she sings really or very or quite loudly. Next, let's practice by completing these sentences to show a medium amount of stress. So pause the video, and when you're done, unpause the video to see the answers. So to show a medium amount of stress, we would use the phrases pretty, kind of, or sort of for numbers 1 and 2, which are modifying adjectives, sleepy and long. Number 3, we would say they talk a fair amount. And number 4, she sings pretty or kind of or sort of loudly, same as the adjectives in 1 and 2. Next, let's practice to show a little stress. So pause the video and complete these sentences to show a little bit of emphasis. Then unpause the video to see the answers. Okay, so for number 1, I'm going to bed. I'm a little bit sleepy, or I'm a bit sleepy. Same with number 2. Number 3, we would just put these after the verbs. They talk a little bit, or she sings a bit loudly for number 4. Okay, so those previous slides, the slides before, talked about how to modify regular adjectives, verbs, and adverbs. Now we're going to talk about how to modify comparatives. Comparatives are phrases that compare two things, and we talked about this in Grammar Lesson 8. And if you can't remember the comparatives, maybe you can review Grammar Lesson 8. So this chart looks really complicated, but it's not really. The first two columns show less and fewer. Now remember, fewer is used with countable nouns. And then the last column shows more and ER. In this chart, we have just a big difference and a small difference. We don't usually use a medium difference with comparatives. So when we want to show a big difference between comparatives, we can use the phrases much, a lot, or far. So for example, we have much less time. With just a regular comparative, it would say we have less time. But if we want to say there's a big difference, we would say we have much less time. Or she talks a lot less than he does. Or I'm far less experienced than her. This might seem a little strange to use much and less together, or a lot and less together, but this means that there's a big difference in how much smaller something is. And with fewer, we can still use a lot and far, but instead of using much, we say many. Because with countable nouns, we use many instead of much. So instead of saying there are much fewer people, we would say there are many fewer people. If we want to use more, like in the last column, we use the same one. So we say we have much more time, she talks a lot more, I'm far more experienced. And we also use a great deal for more, but not as much with less. We could. It's a great deal more trouble. We could say it's a great deal less trouble, but it's not as common. Okay, that's how we make a big difference. Then in the last row, if we want to make a small difference, we would say a little or a bit, just the same as with adjectives and adverbs. This is a little less difficult. They argued a bit less yesterday. We can also use adverbs like slightly. This tea needs slightly less sugar. When we use countable nouns, we would really only use slightly. There are slightly fewer people. And then finally, in the yellow column, we can use these modifiers, but also we can use not much for things that are more. So instead of saying this tea is sweeter, we could say this tea is a little sweeter or not much sweeter to show the same small kind of difference. Notice that when we use comparative verb phrases, we will put the modifier in between the verb and the less. So here it says she talks less, she talks a lot less. Or she talks more, she talks a lot more. And that's because the modifier goes after the verb. So in Grammar Lesson 8, we also learned how to compare using not as and as plus an adjective. And this is important because we use this construction with one-syllable words, short words, like cold or hot or tall. So we would say, I'm not as tall as my sister. This means I am less tall, but we don't say less tall because we don't use short words with the comparative word less. So when we're using this structure, not as, we can also modify these sentences to show a small difference or a big difference. So first, if we want to show a small difference, we would say not quite. So if I say I'm not quite as tall as my sister, I'm saying she's just a little taller than me. The difference is small. If I want to show a large difference, I would say I'm not nearly as tall as my sister. That would mean she's very tall and I am very short. Or I can use this construction to show things are equal. There's almost no difference. So if I say I'm just as tall as my sister, or I'm as tall as my sister with no not, that means we are basically the same height. Okay, so let's practice. So pause the video and complete these sentences to show a big difference in these comparatives. And then unpause the video to see the answers. Okay, to show a big difference, we would use much, far, a lot, or a great deal. So I'm tired, but she isn't. I'm much, or far, or a lot, or a great deal sleepier than she is. So we use these words because of the word sleepier, which is comparative. And the same is true with the second sentence, longer. This is not just long, the adjective, this is longer, the comparative. So these are all the same until number 7. Number 7 has the word fewer because students is a countable noun. So we don't say much fewer, we say many fewer. And finally, number 8, we use as. So to show a big difference, we say nearly. Vermont is not nearly as large as California. Now let's practice again. So pause the video and complete these sentences to show a small difference. Then unpause the video to see the answers. So with these, numbers 1 through 6, we would use a little bit, a little, a bit, or slightly. For number 7, because we have the word fewer, we would just use slightly. And for number 8, the as, we would use quite, not quite, to show a small difference. Okay, so that's our lesson for today on modifiers. If you want to get more grammar practice using modifiers, download the grammar worksheet from the website, EnglishLessonsWithStephanie.com. If you're enjoying these free lessons, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.